Hi, everybody. How's everybody doing today? Everybody staying awake over here? All right. So you guys are stuck with me, unfortunately, but really, really happy to have you on with this esteemed panel as everybody puts their phone away. For folks who don't know me, my name is Zack Fishman. I am the Chief Growth Officer for for Fishman PR, Franchise Elevator, and then, of course, partner and COO of Franchise Supplier Network. You heard a little bit about that this morning from Ryan. What did you guys think of that AI session? You guys feel good about that? Was it helpful? Good. Okay. Wanted to make sure. He's not here, so you can be honest if you have to be, but perfect. So today, very topical as it relates to that, we're going to be talking a lot about tech today. You know, this is something that we added into the program this year. We started and piloted it at Young Conference. Before I do that, how many people have been to Young Conference before? Raise the hands. Perfect. There's some good people in here. Great. So, you know, we started this at Young Conference because we felt it was really important to help brands in the emerging world to understand how to utilize technology properly, right? This is something that you guys have to go through every day. It's a necessary evil for some. And we really wanted to do some experience sharing today with some people that have done this before, right? You know, all these brands are in different industries. You know, we've got health, wellness, and beauty. We've got home service. We've got food and beverage. So you guys can kind of learn exactly, you know, what they know about what they've gone through when it comes to, you know, maybe you decide to build something yourself versus actually using a vendor, or maybe you decide that it's not the right time to do something versus now. This is going to be about timing, build or not build, all of that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So enough of me. I'll let the panelists kind of run through. I'll start with Jackson just to kind of introduce themselves briefly, just so people have some context, and then we can get into it. Yeah, Tom.
Hello. Good to be here. My name's Jackson Loychuck. I'm co-founder and CEO of 30 Minute Hit. We're a women's-only express fitness brand. We have just about 100 locations in 4 countries, and been at this coming up on 20 years. So hope I can share some wisdom with you guys.
My name's Harper. I'm the CEO of Rolling Suds. We're a national residential and commercial power washing franchise. I've been in franchising for years, involved in primarily service brands. And this is my first time as a franchisor. We launched in February. We have 44 units in 12 states across 15 franchisees.
Good morning. I think it's still, yes. Mark Lyso. I am the Senior Vice President of Development for East Coast Wings and Grill. Also President of myfrii, which is an emerging casual dine, fast casual dines, which is a slider, tender, and shake concept, and also the President of Zorability, which is a coaching and investment strategy for emerging brands. So I've been in this space 26 years, in the restaurant space 30 years. I've known the Fishmans 14 years, and looking forward to spending some time with you all today.
Yeah, to give you guys context, I had just gotten my car when Mark started working with us, so 14 years ago, long time. So to start, I'm actually going to start with Mark first. So as it relates to choosing a partner, you know, as many folks know, as you've kind of heard Brad talk, whenever he's up here, he always compares things to dating. You know, I have some of my family in here. That's always what he does. And so finding a tech partner is pretty similar to that, right? You know, you have certain things that you look for. Sometimes you choose your tech partner based off of who they are as people, not about what their features are. So I'm going to start with Mark. When you're thinking about a tech partner and, you know, who to choose, what do you generally look for? Is it features? Is it the features of what they're selling? Is it the people themselves, or is it a mixture of both?
I'm going to frame it first, if I can. So one of the things that we believe in with our organization is there's 3 pillars of franchising. One is unit-level economics to ensure that your franchisee is profitable. 2 is royalty sufficiency, and what does that mean? And 3 is franchisee validation. And it's not just, and what I'll challenge all of us is, it's not just the call that says, I love my franchisor. Validation is opening another unit and then making sure that that becomes the A+, if you will. So what our guidance is always look at using those tenets in when you start seeking out any type of a vendor. So one is, if I'm an emerging brand and I'm using, let's say, a POS company, what does that POS company give me in cost and what does it give me in return? So in looking at POS for its specifics, we want to be able to see enterprise management out of it. We want to see the ability to get data. We want to be able to see the ability to have it integrate with other platforms. And then obviously it becomes down then to a cost if you're an emerging brand. Just went through this with myfrii where we looked at a POS system. It fit for us at that moment, we thought. It was supposed enterprise driven. It had some data points that we wanted. There was ease of execution, and there was a cost factor that made sense lining up with unit level economics. The challenge is that as we dove into it and used it, then the data wasn't as accessible as we wanted. So we had to make a change. We'll get into that, I'm sure, at some other point. So for one of the things that we look for, getting back to the original question, is does it have the data and provide the data that we can use? And does it have the ability to integrate, like with online ordering and such? And does it have the availability then to scale with us from an enterprise management perspective?
Yeah, it's great. And I think that gets into something that's pretty important for you guys to think about is that you're going to probably go in stages in terms of the technology that you use. What works for you today may not work for you 2 years from now, right? And that's something that we're going to go through today because a lot of people kind of get caught up in I need to choose the cheapest thing or I need to choose the most expensive thing because that's the Rolls Royce, but it's not as simple as that. So, Aaron, what about you as it relates to what you look for in a vendor? Because you just did all this.
Yeah, so what I try to do is I reverse engineer the levels of support that I want to provide the franchisee. And I know there's like different layers of which technology to choose, whether it's for franchisees, internal operations, or FranDev, but I'm going to just specifically talk about franchisee and choosing a vendor partner. So I spend about 7 months vetting vendors prior to launching the franchise system, vetting and negotiating with vendors, suppliers. I was fortunate in the sense that a lot of the people that I have known over the years, I knew they could produce, but what I'll say is what was really important for me is that they were aligned with our mission statement and our core values. And that's kind of where I started because I look at suppliers as an extension of our company. They provide services that are outside the realm of what we're capable of doing as an emerging franchisor, and honestly, maybe ever, because it's not the highest leverage thing for me to do to create a CRM. I need one that can do the things that I need it to do for my franchisees, and that's it. The other thing that was important for me particularly is can you keep up with scale? So I knew how many units, or at least relatively how many units we would be selling and how many units we would be opening. With the last brand I worked on, we added 223 units in 24 months, and all of them opened. And so the vendor supplier partners that we worked with that brand, they had to build infrastructure within their company to support the franchisees. They had to invest in growing their business to specifically service the franchisees that we gave them. And so when I vetted the vendors, I asked them, are you willing to do that? And if the answer was no, it was an immediate, this isn't right. So I think working with what are your goals both for a franchisee and the support you want to provide, and then also where do you think you're going to be in 2 years and how can we plan for that now? And I think all that goes into choosing the right suppliers.
Yeah, awesome. That really goes into that theme again, guys, is that not everything is going to work for you today that works in the future. And, a really interesting perspective that we have on this panel is that we have Jackson here who really built most of the technology that they use internally. And that's not for everybody. Some people aren't really prepared for the headache of when a franchisee calls, you're not yelling at your vendor, they're yelling at you. So not everybody really is prepared for that. But what I will say is that it does have some benefits as well. And so, I think this is where we'll kind of get into it. Jackson, for you, when you're thinking about technology within your own brand, and whenever you do decide to venture out, with a vendor, what do you think about? Because that's a higher barrier than it is for you than for others.
Sure. Well, the question of whether to build or not to build, there's really no yes or no. Because there's a lot of ways to sort of look at it. From our perspective, we are unique in that we started building our own platforms 15 years ago when we really started the brand, and that's not common. The reason we did it that way was because at the time we just really didn't find anything that was going to give us exactly what we wanted, and it was a conscious decision to make the investment in developing something that gave us exactly what we needed. And over time, it's proved to be a good investment for sure. There's a lot of upsides to having something that is completely under your control, and you have the ability to pivot, you have the ability to build, you have the ability to solve problems at a relatively quick pace. The downside is that it's resource intensive, time and money for sure, and then you have to be able to support it. If I was asked if I would do it again, then I would, but I wouldn't necessarily do it the same way. And a lot of that's a function of how things have changed over the last few years. 15 years ago, building your own stuff was much more difficult, but at the same time, there was less required. It is easier to build things these days, but there's just more requirement for tech. So it's sort of that double-edged sword. These days, have we built everything that we use? Not entirely everything, because there are points where you don't need to reinvent the wheel. As Aaron said, like things that are off the shelf and will do the job, and really importantly are cost effective, they're still good options. It doesn't mean because you can build something you should. Where you need to put those resources are in the systems and platforms where you're not going to get anything close to what you need off the shelf. And then the other thing is just cost. I always look at it, when we're making a decision, to get to the question of what do you build and what don't you build, it's really about cost for us. Because if I can find something that exists already and it meets most of our needs or all of our needs, and we can just plug into it, and it makes sense from an investment perspective, like what am I getting out versus what am I putting in, then we'll do that. We're not gonna build just because we can. But at the same time, you do have to look at sort of what licensing fees add up to, and it can be, especially it doesn't feel like a lot at the beginning when you're emerging. A quick show of hands, like for sort of size of systems right now, who here is at like 0 to 20 locations? Hands? Okay, like 20 to 50? And 50 to 100? Okay. No, yeah, and that's good. Well, and it's good that you guys are asking these questions now, because the tech platform that you build right now is, these guys have mentioned, it's critical moving forward. It's the foundation of your business, 100%. And what you want to make sure is that you're thinking ahead, and you're not thinking, well, if I've got 10 locations now and my licensing fee times 10 is X, that's not that expensive, and it's not. But if you multiply that to 100, what are you paying per year for that license? And could you build it, save a whole lot of money, and be able to reinvest that somewhere else? So a lot of times you do have to look at it from that cold hard. What is it going to cost me now? But also, what is it going to cost long term?
Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
So what I did before we launched, it was one of those nights as an entrepreneur where it's like 9 o'clock on a Friday, and I'm like sitting there watching TV with my wife, and I'm like, babe, I can't watch another episode of Bridgerton. I have to go and sit in front of my computer. And I was up till 3 a.m. because I was like, this is what I want the franchisee to experience. This is the customer experience I want for the franchisee, start to finish. When this is the script I want the call center to say. This is the automation. This is the cadence in which I want the text messages to go out. This is the drip campaign. This is the goals of the drip campaign. And this is also how I wanted it to be automated for the franchisee. Then I took that document to multiple CRM companies, and there were only 3 that could build it. And then I just basically asked a ton of different people who I had worked with, that had worked with them in the past, other franchisors, and then chose the best one. And the other thing I'll say is, like, definitely negotiate with your suppliers. Like, just because their price is a certain price does not mean that's the price you have to accept for your franchisees. The way that I look at it is, I'm going to go, what's the best price for the franchisee and what makes sense based on the P&L that I know they need to have. And then, you know, there was another option that was good. There were three options. One was way too expensive. And then there was another option that was good, but they weren't willing to work with us on price because they didn't see the scale that like the other supplier did, because that other supplier knows me personally. So we ended up choosing that one. So I think just like reverse engineering what you need and then kind of going and asking around is something that's worked for me.
That's really great. So by show of hands here, how many people know what a technology fee is? Okay, got some people in the room. How many people actually have that in their FDD today? Good, that's a little higher than I thought. So what we want to structure this with now is that you guys are probably wondering what budgets all of these pieces of technology come out of. So I would say probably in the past 10 to 15 years, it's become the new du jour thing that Lane's team and many others in the legal world suggest, that you do have this in your FDD to have a separate fund from your marketing or brand fund or whatever you guys call it for technology specifically, right? Because it's not just about marketing for tech. It could be for operations, fran dev, real estate, anything, right? And so what I want the panelists to do is to just go down, and we'll start with you, Jackson, just about how you actually use your technology fee and what that means to your franchisee when they see that on their line item. Like, what does that mean to them? Like, what do they think they're paying for?
Well, for us, it's actually pretty easy because they know that goes directly into development of systems and tools and platforms. Like, because we're doing it in-house, so it's, you know, pretty transparent with us. It's, you know, we're always rolling out new tools and systems. You know, making things current, updating them, integrating things, and making their lives easier, and that comes at no extra cost to them, right? We're not consistently saying, hey, here's another add-on, you know, because we've integrated this new platform, and you know, there's costs associated. So it allows us to keep things really, really simple, which is, you know, which is great in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and that's very important because the reason why people are putting technology fees in is that they really are trying to make the franchisees a stakeholder in these decisions, right? You know, for folks who don't have an advisory council, number one, you should. And I would say number two, if you're not talking about technology discussions with your advisory council and make them part of the discussion, that's what they're there for. So definitely use that. And for emerging brands that don't have that right now, not saying you need it today, but you definitely need it at some point, because whether you like it or not, franchisees are your partners. And so you need to make sure that they feel, you know, number one, valued, as we just had this discussion beforehand if you guys were still sitting in here, but two, I think the really big piece of this is that, you know, the franchisees need to feel like they're part of that technology decision, because as Jackson, you know, said earlier, this is the foundation of your brand, and so they need to feel like that they agree with what you're using. Nothing ever works out whenever you impose technology on franchisees that don't want it. So.
And always be aware, the bigger you get, the more it will cost. So anticipate that. Make sure you have that built into your agreements, and your agreements allow for increased fees and ways to keep developing new things, because it will get more expensive as time goes on and you grow. There's just no way around it. And the other thing I would mention, especially, you know, when you're at the beginning, if you sense that what you have now is not what you're going to need, you know, moving forward in the near future, now's the time to really do the research and make the changes, because the bigger you get, the harder it is to change. You know, it's like turning a ship. The bigger the ship gets, the, you know, wider the radius it takes to make it a pivot. So really take that into consideration and plan ahead.
Yeah, so Mark, I'm going to take this to you because you just did this very recently with myfrii, and I think it's interesting to kind of understand what you considered to be technology for food and beverage. How many people in here are in the food and beverage world? Is there anybody in here? Okay. Not too many. But what I will say is that I think it's really important for you guys to understand, because this is the most complex of anything that you'll hear. And so I think it's important for you guys to understand, you know, how Mark kind of lines it out from a tech perspective, because this is what it should look like.
I would like to, you know, line it out the way it should be, but it doesn't always end up that way.
No, it doesn't.
I think the important thing is you know, I started talking about the POS system, but all the different technology platforms that go into specifically restaurants with online ordering, the websites, not only consumer but fran dev websites, all the social media that goes along with it. But I think what I did touch on, you know, going through this with myfrii and already making a decision to switch a POS vendor based on the lack of data that we were getting out of it. But in a real-time situation, because I want to play off this, is we, as a 35-unit brand, are going through a complete POS conversion currently with our brand as in East Coast Wings. We started with one of the great workhorses in the data collection point of sale system, which then came out with a new iteration that was cloud-based, went through beta, tried it, didn't work, pulled back, went to a second beta, didn't work, pulled back, and so we made the decision that we were going to convert the whole system to another POS company. So what the brand did is negotiated a deal, number one, and two, then invested money into the franchise system to defray some of the cost. And then we put everyone on a conversion schedule where, let's say, restaurant B just renewed their licensing fee. They would be one of the last to go so that we made sure that we weren't encumbering their P&L as such. But the important thing is, and it goes back to your point, is don't wait, create the strategy, create the financing, protect the franchisee's profitability, but then get a system that gives you the data to be able to communicate with them more effectively in growing their business.
That's great. Go ahead, Aaron.
So for me, there was one thing that I wanted for franchisees that none of the platforms had, and I was looking very specifically for a dashboard that was able to show where the franchisees fall on the 8 key metrics that drive the growth of their business. And you know, I wanted a very specific data. I wanted to know where they were either month to date, year to date, on, let's just say, average job size for residential, where the rest of the system was from an average, and then where they fell 1 through, let's say there's 100 franchisees on that specific metric. No one had that. So one of the reasons why I chose the supplier that I chose for this specific is because they were going to build it for us on Tableau. And understood the need, and that was like it was a non-negotiable. We needed that platform, and we've spent a long time developing it, and because it's really important. And so my guidance to franchisees is I want you to buy a specific monitor that you plug into your laptop, and the only thing on that monitor is that dashboard. And that's how for us, like a specific technology can like drive behavior. And so you kind of need to like work backwards from like what you're trying to accomplish.
Awesome. So what we're going to do next, everybody, is we're actually going to go by discipline here. Because I think what's important to note is that technology isn't all about marketing tech or operations tech or franchise development tech, which there isn't quite as much, but they exist, of course. So what I want to do is actually start with franchise development and kind of have each of the panelists talk through their experiences when they're choosing technology and what they think about and what they look for and what is easier for them to actually build, as Jackson has built quite a bit, versus things that they would actually find a vendor for. And there are many that are here. Of course, you guys see, on that screen there, this really qualifies for all these sponsors that you see on the screen here. So, Jackson, I'm going to start with you. When it comes to franchise development, obviously, it is really the engine in which makes the brand go. So for you, what are you looking for, when you are trying to vet out a technology partner or deciding that you're going to build something?
Sure. Well, when it came to looking at options for FranDev, we took a good hard look probably 5 or 6 years ago at sort of what was available on the market, and as Zack said, there actually wasn't a ton of sort of options in the FranDev space specifically. Tons and tons of operational software out there, and we'd already sort of built our own operational software, so we had the capability to sort of look around and say, well, if there's nothing else there, as I mentioned earlier, if there's nothing that makes sense, then we should look at building something. And we did. And we built a discovery system for our candidates that allows a really unique way of walking our candidates through the discovery process, gives us insight into sort of their wants and needs, but also their behaviors, and then allows communication to be able to enable our franchise sales team to develop relationships and create connection and build trust. And so those are the sort of things that I think are key if you're specifically focused on FranDev. Is there's a lot of focus on systems out there that make life easier for the salesperson, but always consider what your candidate's experience is. Like, how are they experiencing the brand? Because you got to remember that discovery process is their first experience, that first touch point with your brand in many cases, and that is absolutely critical to the sales process. If that experience feels clunky, if it feels disjointed, if it's not timely, all of those things will set the wrong tone. And remember, most times these candidates are looking at more than one brand, so you need to be competitive in that environment. And technology these days is absolutely critical, in my opinion, because the landscape is changing with who your candidates are. Everybody's expectation of what that experience is now being guided by technology. If that process is not slick, if you are not meeting their expectations as far as what they feel they should be getting out of that experience and that discovery process, you're on your back foot. So make sure that you're spending time and investing appropriately in that space. I see so many brands spend all their money on lead generation. They'll say, I need more leads, more leads, more leads. In our industry, there's 1 million leads a year generated. And does anybody show of hands what the average conversion rate is? 1%. So the basic math says, do we need more leads? Or do we need to convert the ones we already have? And this is where you should be looking to technology to help you do that. It's not always about just increasing your volume of leads. And then, or what do I do once I convert them into a franchisee? There's tons of systems out there, but you need to be thinking about how you can leverage technology and what's available to actually help convert them.
Awesome, great. So for Aaron, obviously you have a very unique perspective on the franchise development side of things, so I might actually skip to something that is a little bit more relevant. Aaron, for folks who don't know, primarily sells through the consultant and broker world, whatever they prefer to be called these days. But not a lot of technology there. It's just Aaron's just a nice, awesome guy, so they just know where to find him. But what I would say, Aaron, I think is really, really fascinating for how many folks are in the home service space in here, home and commercial service? That's a lot. Okay, so this is pretty relevant. So for you, Aaron, you just did something that is, honestly probably one of the most difficult things when you're thinking about, looking for a home service technology, and that is operations. Because I think for you, unit economics are so important for you to be able to, it's important for everybody, but for you especially, for you to have that frame of reference for the brokers and the consultants to want to continue selling your brand. So it's really important for you in particular. So talk through what you look for when it comes to an operational tech and why, and how you kind of went through that process.
On the FranDev side, right?
No, for operations tech in general.
Yeah. So for my team, what we've done is we've taken the kind of process that we've established for franchisees, and we've created kind of a funnel, just like the FranDev funnel, of where they're at in the process and what needs to be communicated both internally and externally to the franchisees. So I'm looking for automation. I'm looking for automatic emails that go out at certain different stages. I'm looking for checklists. I'm looking for being able to track how many of those things that franchisee has done. I'm looking for it to be live so that it's not, we've gotten past a week and you didn't get your insurance or you didn't set up your EIN. It's like we're 2 days into our that week and nothing's been accomplished. So we can see that on the back end. And then from my perspective, like, onboarding is such an important process, because that's the franchisees, what Jackson said is really relevant, but after they sign, their experience getting their business open really sets the stage for the rest of their experience. So we just hired a VP of onboarding. We elevated at that role rather than kind of what we were thinking originally was onboarding coach. launch coach, and then it's such an important role that I feel that it was important that role had the title of president in it. So his entire goal is just optimizing the launch experience so that we can successfully and profitably launch multiple franchisees per month.
And Aaron met him at one of our conferences, which is pretty cool.
I did earlier this year in February, and we've been talking ever since.
So, Mark, for you.
Can I just jump in 1 second on that?
Sure. Yeah, please.
Just because it's a really good example. I couldn't agree more. Onboarding is absolutely critical. If you set the wrong tone with your franchisees, that can spiral very quickly. They're in the wrong mindset because they didn't have a good onboarding experience, and it can take a long time to recover from that. That is one, for example, that we didn't build because we found a third-party platform that fit the bill. It was cost-effective, and there was no need to have us recreate the wheel. So there are circumstances, even if you're building your own stuff, where you need to be objective and don't let your ego get in the way and say, well, I'm going to build it because I can. If something fits, use it.
Which platform?
That one we use Monday, actually.
Awesome. So, Mark, for you, obviously, one thing I want to make sure that we frame up here is that it's really, really, really important to make sure that you actually build a whole map of what you want to build when you get started here. I know it looks daunting at first, but making that checklist in whatever fashion you do is the easiest way to feel like you're actually covering all those bases. Sometimes brands say, you guys have all experienced this. Technology says that they do everything. But the one thing to consider is that some of them have primary things that they're great at, and then they have ancillary things that they support through a channel partner, or they do it, but they don't actually do it. But what I would say is that there's also other things to consider. And Mark, for you, the difference between all-in-one solutions and, I would say solutions that really focus on just one thing that they do really well is very, very nuanced in food, right? I think that in that world, it's super easy to just get one thing that does 27 things so you don't have to worry about it again. But it's the only thing that you blame if that's what you end up doing. So talk us a bit through, from an operational perspective, just to frame it up, how do you think through that when you're trying to choose technology? I think that's number one, because that's the part that you spend the most time on, I would imagine. And then number two, how would you say from an operational perspective, you guys have found all-in-one versus, vendors that just do one thing?
That's a great question. I don't know that there's an all-in-one out there. I think
they try to say there is.
I'm sorry?
They try to say there is.
True. But I think, a couple things. David said it yesterday about pace. Sam Ballas has all been about growth with profitability. So part of what we do in technology, and take you a step back, it's like 30 years ago when we were in the restaurant space and we were entering invoices, we were doing it on a ledger book in the dining room. And now everything has moved back to the office in the restaurant space because of being able to use technology. Not a bad thing, but then how do you still create that interaction, that relationship with the consumer that comes in between 2 and 4, which obviously your highest complaint rates are between 2 and 4 and after 8 o'clock at night. And where's the managers? In the office on their computers, typically. So one of the things that we always look at is how do we blend using technologies to send the message, attract the right candidate, and do it in simple terms. Because if we can break it down into the simplest doable part, then there's less complexity to deal with. So one of the things that we vetted this year, or actually last year, was a CRM platform that made sense in how to keep track of the candidate flow. And again, we're not going to have, by choice, 100 restaurants in the pipeline to increase valuation for private equity. We're going to bring on the right candidate at the right time, provide them the focus and attention to be profitable. I mean, that's one of our monikers, is driven by unit-level economics. So we would be counterintuitive if we didn't build our systems that way. There are so many vendors, bless them all, that want to sell us on the new shiny penny, shiny bell out there. And it's easy to ready, fire, aim. And the best advice is to go back to your original core tenets of what you want to get in your brand with franchisees. And I said it before, the 3 tenets for us are level economics, royalty sufficiency, and validation of the franchisee. So what we will do is create the strategy on what platforms we use, what's the messaging. We use PR, we use content, we enhance our website as another platform to be able to drive that candidate in to the experience. And then obviously it's our job then to interview, recruit, interview, get them into a process of closure versus just what's your cost per lead. So I think it's from my vantage point, being an older person in the space, we still have to connect with that candidate, and then we have to walk them through the process because they don't know what they don't know. And so the important thing is, as we said before, choose things that fit your budget, fit your purpose, and then also then drive results.
Go ahead.
The one thing I was going to add, based on my experience, is as an emerging brand, like, you have to be able to be nimble and make changes as soon as you see that they need to be made. So we brought on an LMS initially and signed a contract, and that LMS was supposed to house kind of a lot of the process that we did for the onboarding of franchisees, or that we do for onboarding of franchisees. It ended up being clunky. It wasn't user-friendly. There was really no app experience to it. And midway through our first launch of franchisees, we switched softwares because we knew immediately that it needed to be better and a better experience. And I think one of the abilities as an emerging brand is, like, you can do that and just follow your gut and do what you think is best for the business. And what's best for the business is typically what's best for the franchisee.
Go ahead.
I would echo that for sure. I would also just encourage everybody at the beginning of this journey for everybody, keep it simple. Like, don't make things overly complicated. I see and hear a lot of concern about making sure that this subject is about tech stack, right? And how do I manage that tech stack? And there seems to be a ton of concern about making sure that every system or platform you have integrates completely with everything else. Integration is good because it simplifies things sometimes, but it can also complicate things when you're constantly trying to make sure that everything talks with everything all the time. So really be objective about it and go, does this platform, it works for me, and just because it doesn't necessarily talk with that platform, am I ruling it out? Sometimes it doesn't matter. I'll give you an example. Like, we built from scratch our own Fran Dev platform. It's really high speed. It doesn't talk directly to our operations platform because it doesn't have to. There's no need for it to. Once we make a franchise sale, it's as simple as our admin team entering in, 5 lines of information, and we're off to onboarding. Could I make them talk to each other? Absolutely. Is it worth the time? Nope. Because unless we're selling 300 franchises a month, like, the data entry is minimal. So, but people get caught up in that. Will this talk to that? Will this talk to that? Well, if it can, great, but it's not the only thing that matters. So when you're talking about your tech stack, keep that in mind, right? It's okay to have a little bit of stack. You don't need to eliminate it all.
Yeah, that's a good point. Go ahead, Aaron.
Just real quick. So over the years, I've learned that the more that you can track the communication with franchisees internally, the better. And so as we looked for, one of your questions was, what do I look for in an operations platform? Is there the ability to track the conversations with the franchisees? And what we do now with our onboarding process is we have templates for certain calls. There's an itinerary, there's action items, there's things that you discuss on a weekly basis in order to get them and their behaviors to that next stage in the onboarding process. And if you have a platform and you have your team track all the notes from those conversations, you have less communication necessary between your team about what this franchisee is saying versus what this franchisee is saying. All they have to do is pull up the notes from the last call that the marketing team had or that the business coach had. And I think that's it's labor intensive at the beginning, but it's even more labor intensive if you try to apply it later down the line, and you don't do that from the beginning.
Can I add one thing? I agree with that 100%. I would also really encourage people to do their research carefully when they're selecting a partner and make sure that your data is yours, you own it, that they doesn't get held hostage by a supplier if you ever need to change. Because in my opinion, the number one thing that your technology should be providing you is data. David mentioned it in his keynote. Like, that's absolutely critical. Like, data is everything these days. And so your platforms, if they're not tracking data, if they're not providing it to you in easy way to manage, analyze, and utilize, then you're with the wrong platform, 100%.
Yeah, and there's, for folks who don't know, there are a lot of technologies out there that help other technologies to talk to each other. There's a lot of data aggregation technologies too that make all that data sit in one place. All these things exist in the franchise space. I know it seems crazy, but we're not in the Stone Age anymore. They do exist. So what I want to spend a little bit of time on here, we've got about 8.5 minutes here, is to talk about marketing, because I think that that's a really, really big problem for a lot of brands, in terms of what to choose, because there are so many. What do you do when you're trying to choose marketing technology? How do you even go through that process? One thing that we do, all the time, and I think Jake and Ryan are both in the room, I believe they are. So when Jake and Ryan are talking to folks at Franchise Supplier Network, one thing that they always tell them to do is to really map out what's your cheapest option, what's the option that's probably about mid-market, and what's your luxury option. So you can really understand for everything, especially for marketing, how to build, right? Because if you're an emerging brand right now, you kind of have to understand and weigh your options, because you're using your franchisees' money. You're not using yours. And so it's really important to understand what the right timing is for all these things. So Jackson, for you, when you are actually thinking about, choosing marketing vendors or technology in your system, because this is obviously so important, because this is how the franchisees make money, is you bring them leads, right? So for you, what do you look for and what do you think of? And really, for your brand, was it the bargain option? Did you view the luxury options being the first thing when you were young? What would you say?
For us, this is one that we looked around and really could not find a vendor that made sense from a value proposition perspective. And we do everything in-house and internally, because the cost savings at scale is so significant when it comes to a marketing vendor, being able to do it internally, if provided you have the right team. And this is the big thing. Don't try and do it yourself if you don't have expertise, if you don't know what you're doing. But if you can create the right internal team to do your marketing, I am seeing more and more brands go in that direction, making sure they've got the right people in place, and then doing it internally. It is definitely an option, but you have to have the technology to be able to track it and manage it effectively. So that's the route that we chose, and we built our own tools and systems to be able to do that. And the advantage, the investment has paid off, because our franchisees' marketing dollar just goes further at the end of the day.
Yeah, agreed. And so for Mark, for you, as it relates to the food and beverage world in particular, there's a lot of marketing methods that you have to use to get people to walk in that door to order online. I would say arguably more so than anybody. For you, what do you think about in terms of, how to utilize marketing technology? And, would you say that there is a time for the bargain option as a young brand, or do you feel that splashing and doing the luxury option for you when you're choosing marketing vendors makes the most sense for texting and things like that?
Good question, Zach. I think, from an emerging brand perspective, makes it a little bit more challenging than from a mature brand perspective. I mean, in a mature brand, you've got social media that works. You can work with an agency to track the journey of the guest from a click to order or click to call, so you know where your return on investment is in that digital space of social media. I think we've all entered into that arena from a perspective of how do you draw the guest into the building and measure it if you don't do some type of a journey tracking. The digital space with different companies that can utilize Google search, geofencing is also great options to drive your consumer base in. And really the loyalty programs are great programs, as you probably already know, where you've got a collective of your consumer base, and you can then directly involve them or get them interested in what you're doing with the restaurant to drive them in. I think then, if I may, from a Fran Dev marketing perspective, I mean, there's two sides to this. There's consumer feed, and one last thing about consumer is that your website, as we all know, should be e-commerce driven, so it can drive people to that order process quickly and efficiency and not encumbering their time there. From a Fran Dev perspective in marketing, it's how do I utilize the different avenues to get my message out? And is that through PR? Is that through content marketing? Is that through video, enhanced websites? So I think the conundrum, if you will, is how do you get the best reach for the lowest cost so that it protects not only the franchisee's investment with an ad fund, but then also the G&A of the corporation.
Awesome. So we're going to have Aaron answer this question, and I think that's actually going to be it. So I'll close up after this. So Aaron, in terms of marketing technology, when you're thinking about it in the home and commercial service world for you, what do you look for? Because it's very, very competitive. I would say in the home and commercial services world, for folks who are in that world, they know. Search terms are definitely among the most expensive in that world. And so Aaron, talk us a bit through, when you went through that marketing process to help your franchisees get more leads. What did you go through, and how did you kind of go through that decision-making process?
Yeah, so I chose multiple different specialists in the marketing department. I chose a specialist that specializes in reputation management and social media. I chose a specialist that focuses on outbound lead gen for commercial customers. I focused on specialists that are very good at that one thing. And so we have 6 marketing companies that generate leads for franchisees. The thing that I've done over the years, and I think it's really effective, is I try to decrease the amount of risk for franchisees from a cost perspective on marketing. So we front load about 6 months of marketing expense in the upfront investment for franchisees, and we also then require them to spend a certain amount of money per month. And then my team internally manages their budget. And we do that for the first 6 months, and then they take on the entire spend on month 7. Now, what that does for us and for the franchisee is they're not allocating a ton of capital, so during that time as they ramp up for those 6 months, their margins are larger, because that first 6 months is so important for setting the stage for the next 2 years. And now they have some concrete data starting month 7 that they've spent this amount of money, and they've generated this amount of leads. And then we have a dashboard for them that shows what kind of that ROI per lead source looks like, so that they can see and have transparency in there. Now, what I've changed, and what we've changed just recently, is we were going to have franchisees then have an account manager at all 6 of those marketing companies. And we realized that it would be a better experience for franchisees if we brought that kind of command center element in-house. So we have someone in-house on the marketing team that fields all of those leads and then inputs them directly into the franchisees, and then we bill the franchisees for what the marketing companies bill us, and it's a better experience for them. It's more work on our end, but the more they're focused on talking to 6 different account managers, the less they're out there building the business. And so I'd rather have us and our team take that off their plate. So that's what we've done.
Awesome. So thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. So what I want to do before we break here, because we've got under a minute here, and I'm getting a look from my dad that I'm getting the hook in a second. So a couple of resources for you guys just to continue this conversation and to kind of structure these questions. So number one, for those who may not know, we are run by Franchisors.com. So as you guys saw, you had the nice little Barbie here earlier today. That's for a reason. So we just actually created a website, and that's in large part due to Mr. Hicks, who spoke earlier today. And we've created an online community. So if you go to Franchisors.com and you have questions about how to really go through this process, we have mentors that are on site. Actually, one of them happens to be Sam Ballas, who runs East Coast Wings with Mark, and many others that have the ability to answer these questions online with you. So that's a resource for folks who have not downloaded that. Definitely do so you can have that discussion. Secondly, if you have any questions, Jake and Ryan are in the room for you. They are our technologists as it relates to anything from a marketing, operations, or development perspective, so please go to see them. And of course, Dean Hatzatheodosio is around as well. Thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy your lunch. Cheers.